Imagine a world with no cold calling. A world where companies don't sell your data to other companies who want to pester you. At G4 Claims, we don't cold call and we don't buy a single lead from data companies. Oh, and if you're due any compensation from your car accident, you pay nothing to us at all. For full accident management support, including motor replacement, repairs and personal injury compensation claims, just search G4 Claims today. For help the way you want it.
Hi and welcome to this week's episode of the DW podcast. I am in Basta Pizza Bar in Partick, joined by Patrick. How you doing?
Patrick from Partick.
That's it, exactly.
I live just a few minutes along the road, so the envelopes get a bit confusing sometimes.
Absolutely, it's a lovely place. It's the first time I've been in, so thanks to Innes for having us, letting us in here, and very much looking forward to having a pizza when it's safe to do so.
Absolutely.
How are you getting on?
How am I getting on? It's weird. I mean, everybody is out trying to do election campaign stuff, and since that started, kind of meeting up with journalists and photographers and stuff, and they're all excited to be out and about again after, being stuck at home, working from home. So it's good fun that we're out and about campaigning, but it's still really limited.
Absolutely.
We can't go door knocking, and even if technically it could probably be made safe, I think people, especially in a place like Glasgow where it's all tenement closes, people wouldn't welcome it,
Absolutely.
Delivery's fine, but it's not the same when you can't have a conversation to people. So yeah, we're all trying to find new ways of having those conversations and reaching people. So it's great fun to be in an election, but it's a really different, odd kind of election. How
does that compare? Do you feel a bit disillusioned by it, or do you think, do you know what, I'm just going in, this is the way it is and we'll make it work?
Well, yeah, you have to. I mean, you can't just sit there thinking, I wish there wasn't a pandemic. I wish there wasn't, but there is, and you just have to work through it. And in some ways it does force people to be more creative. It's forcing us to be more creative. Lots of organisations have found that actually the objections they had to people working from home can be solved. Yep. And we're probably going to see a lot of change that will last. We need to find ways to make sure that works for people, not just for employers, But yeah, it's anything that's a challenge is also kind of interesting because it forces you to think differently.
It must be really interesting for yourself because, we're all sitting at home during this, working from home, as you said. You're at the forefront of making these decisions as to, what is the road out of lockdown, what does it look like, and do you feel a degree of responsibility? And I suppose you must look at your colleagues sometimes and think, what are they talking about? I don't agree with it, especially when you look at the Tories down south and, the way that Boris tried to rush things through last year, and you must be tearing your hair out if you had it.
Yeah, I mean, it is a sense of responsibility. And also I think, if we're honest, all of us in politics, it's been very clear that a pandemic was going to happen sooner or later. We could all have been better prepared. We could all have been, forcing questions up the agenda about how prepared is the NHS, how prepared is our care sector. We've been challenging things like insecure employment, insecure housing for loads of other reasons. Yeah. But we could have and should have seen it in terms of how resilient is our society against a really traumatic issue like a pandemic.
Absolutely.
So everybody, I think, is trying to figure out what's the best way to hold government to account. We don't want to be opportunistic about it, but we do want to make sure that they're under pressure where they need to be. But I think everybody's also conscious that, especially with the climate emergency and the likelihood that not just pandemics, but many other really difficult challenges are coming down the track toward us. I think everybody's thinking we're going to have to get better at resilience. We're going to have to get better at planning our society so that people can cope with really tough times, because there may be more coming.
Yeah, I hate to be doom and gloom, but you mentioned the climate emergency there, and I think that's obviously been at the forefront of the agenda for the Scottish Greens for many years, but it's now getting pushed up the agenda. We've got COP26 coming to Glasgow, and How important is it to be on top of that?
I mean, it's critical. It's especially for the generation of school climate strikers and folk who are recognising they're going to live their entire lives in a time defined by this crisis, the collapse of our life support system, and defined by our response to it as well. We've reached a really interesting point politically where every political party knows they need to say the right things. Very few of them, maybe the Westminster Tories, but not even the Tories up here, have outright climate deniers. Scotland's never really had much of that. We used to have a bit of it. But even as a fossil fuel producing country, when the first climate change legislation was being debated, every single political party was moving amendments to make it stronger.
That's positive, certainly positive.
Yeah, it's very unusual though. Very few countries had that kind of dynamic at that point. I didn't always agree with what the right of politics were trying to do, but they were trying to do something that they thought would make it a better bill. They were not trying to knock it down and dismantle it, Sure. So everybody's now using language like net zero and just transition and climate emergency. We're not seeing an emergency response.
Yeah.
And we're not seeing a transition on the scale and pace that's needed. People talk about a just transition, but they also talk about continuing oil and gas extraction for as long as there is demand for it.
Yeah.
Well, if we do that, we're screwed. A transition that is too late is the same as not even trying. So we need to move that sense of a window of opportunity that is rapidly closing. That needs to be where the kind of political consciousness is, rather than just here are my next set of targets which I'm going to miss.
You hit the nail on the head. It's ultimately actions speak louder than words. And in my opinion, the Scottish Government have said that they will do X, Y, and Z, but it's actually doing it that is what you're expecting them to do and what you need them to do to change that. And
yeah.
Again, you look at the younger generation. I've got a younger sister who lives in the Highlands, who's only 17, and her awareness around issues like this are so far ahead of my family members who are, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And for me, that's a real positive.
Yeah.
It's got to be that you believe the people that are coming through. It's not about us anymore. It's about how do we protect, the future generations.
Now, last year, I think it was just might have been just a week or so before lockdown. There was a climate strike demo in George Square, and I had the extraordinary privilege of introducing my mum as a speaker at it.
Love it.
They'd asked me to speak, and my mum was in the audience, and I couldn't help getting her up because there is a point to make. She was a green activist decades ago, back in the 70s and 80s, and if the world had taken action, serious action at that point, when the green movement was first, not just the green movement, when the scientific community globally was first saying, look, this is serious. This is going to kill a lot of people if we don't turn it around. If the world had taken that action then, it would have been easy. It would have been slow and gradual and easy. And it's only because decade after decade has gone past and we haven't taken that action that now it is an emergency response that's needed, and it has to be rapid. There's no shying away from that.
I love that you brought up your mum, because I suppose what I was wanting to do is touch back onto your early experiences in politics. And for me, everyone is shaped in some way by their parents, be that positively or negatively. And I've heard you speak before, about your mum taking you in your tram to CND rallies and being arrested at Faz Lane with your mum, campaigning as well.
No, my mum was, she was a green activist, but also a community activist. And I think she kind of got close to the peace movement partly because my mum was a midwife, and there was a woman who was staying at the Faz Lane Peace Camp who was pregnant and wasn't getting much support or help on the terms that she needed it. And so my mum just started going up there to visit her and make sure she was all right and all that kind of stuff. So there was a little bit of a kind of family connection there as well. Do
you remember going, in your pram to these rallies, or was that before you? What was your earliest memory?
I certainly remember getting pushed along in a pram on a CND march, and I remember my mum knitting me a CND jumper.
Brilliant.
That I wore to primary school.
That's amazing. That's so stereotypical green.
But yeah, I mean, I was growing up in Dunbar, so there were folk there with families where they had a job at the base, and it was a job, and that was important. And we've still got to recognise that, whether it's nuclear weapons, whether it's the arms industry, which is still getting funding from the Scottish Government at the moment, whether it's the oil and gas industry, or other industries that we want to see decline, like things like tobacco. We don't want to be thinking that our economic future is dependent on industries that do so much harm. But we also don't want to say, to hell with the economics and let's just demand some kind of hair-shirt future. We need to be investing in the sustainable industries that will create prosperity for the future. And if anybody tells you that that's a question of market forces, don't believe a word of it. That is just handing the problem over to the basic economic system that brought us to the brink of crisis is not going to be the one that solves it. Yeah. So we're going to need to see a reimagined role for the state, and I'd say including the local state. It's not just about central government. Yeah. It's about what communities can do collectively through local government as well. If we had local government that was worthy of the name in this country, it's been depleted of its power and of its agency.
Absolutely, and you hit the nail on the head for me. I mean, I'm from Motherwell, brought up in Lanarkshire, and live in the shadows of the Ravenscraig, and you see that the effect that shutting that plant has had in the community. And I think what the Scottish Greens look at, is, we don't want these industries, killing off the environment, being there for us, but yes, we'll get rid of them, but we're going to put jobs in place to look after that community. We've got some of the most skilled engineers in the world. Yes. It's not as if they're going to be out on their
We need to be unapologetic about using phrases like economic planning.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean the state has to control everything, but it means having a sense of where your economy is going. Mm-hmm. Just recently, not so many years ago, we shut down the last coal-fired power station in Scotland. Good. It had to close. It had to go. That was the right thing. But what we should have done was spend the last 10 years of its operation with the operator, private sector business, the local council, central government, all around the table saying, how do we invest in this community's future? Yeah. And instead, they were all saying, no, we're fully committed to the long-term life of this plan. Longannet is going to be there, we're committed to these jobs. And it's only once you finally take the decision it's closing, right, let's have a task force to try. Yeah. Absolutely, it's too late. If you can see economic change coming, you've got to plan for it. Otherwise, you just leave people on the scrap heap.
Yep. You were elected in 2003 for the first time?
Long time ago.
So
when I was young.
You're going to get elected again, and that'll be over 20 years in the Scottish Parliament, halfway through the next Parliament. What makes you keep going back?
Well, we've not finished yet, have we?
Great answer. Absolutely.
No, I mean, it has been a privilege, and I've been through. I got elected when we went from 1 seat to 7. Robin Harper had been our first and only MSP in the first session of the Scottish Parliament, and we suddenly went to 7 seats, and it was incredibly exciting. And yes, we're going to grow the movement in Scotland. We're going to be a mainstream part of the political landscape, and not mainstream in the sense of continuing the same kind of centre ground politics, but we're going to shake things up, and we're going to be solid. And then we went down from 7 down to 2 seats for the next 2 sessions, and it was really, really tough. It
must have been lonely.
It's awful trying to make the impact that you know needs to be made without the capacity. So now that we went back up to 6 seats at the last election, that was again a moment of thinking we have to not let that collapse happen again. And we were then at the point of having grown the membership immensely on the back of the independence referendum, which was a moment when I think a lot more people noticed green politics, as opposed to just knowing, there's a green MSP, isn't there? Actually seeing green politics put front and centre of a national debate. So I think we're a different party than we were at that point. Yeah. in lots of other European countries, Greens have been in government, both nationally and locally, and I see no reason at all that we shouldn't aspire to that. Not necessarily expecting us to sweep to power and be the biggest party after this election, but making that progress and demonstrating by having an impact that when Greens get into positions of influence, they put forward good, positive ideas. They don't spend their time playing games and just trying to. I mean, look at where Scottish politics has been in the last few months. You've had this bizarre sense of almost kind of Trumpian conspiracy theories coming from the Tories,
isn't it?
And I've almost got to the point where I'm kind of expecting them come the election result to be marching down the Royal Mile saying stop the steal. This is the tone of politics that they've got, and it achieves absolutely nothing. It gets their base fired up. Yeah. It gets people who support them angry, but it achieves nothing in the way of positive change that actually makes a difference in people's lives.
Patrick,
you compare that to what we've achieved. I think it makes a difference.
You talk about getting this base fired up, and these people being rallied on the streets and online, and I think since the referendum, but more so now, you see that firsthand on social media. You must open up your phone or your laptop and look at your Twitter mentions and think, what is this going on? It's worrying.
Well, you're reminding me how long I've been in the job again. I remember Twitter when it was nice. I remember Twitter when it was mostly people just posting a link to a nice thing they found, saying, this is nice, isn't it? And lots of people would say, oh yeah, that's nice. And it was just a kind of sharing experience. Instagram's still a little bit like that. But there's lots of social media that just amplifies the kind of worst elements.
Yeah, and I don't think these parties, like the Tories, for example, and you look over in America with Trump, where would you start with that? But they don't help it. It's almost like they want to fuel the flames.
Yeah. Oh no, it's a very deliberate strategy, and it's depressing for me. I'm a sci-fi fan. I always have been. And if you'd told me when I was a kid that everybody would have this little slab in their pocket that could not just access the sum total of human knowledge, but communicate with anybody else instantly. Yeah. I mean, that's an incredibly empowering, enlightening idea, and it's turned into a bin fire.
Yeah, and it's something that should depressing. Be so positive.
I know.
No, it's horrendous. There must be some of them though that you read it and you just laugh. If you don't laugh, you'll cry.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think sometimes I should make better use of the block button. I try not to, because I kind of think even if people are being really unpleasant, it's kind of healthy for me to see. It's not really healthy, is it? But it kind of feels like, as a politician, I ought to see it. Yeah. At some point, I'll probably just get in and say I don't want to hear from you.
I think it must be draining though. It must be really, really draining, because you're spending all day doing your best to help other people, doing what you think's right for this country, and getting people through such a difficult time, and to go home at night, when you're wanting to switch off and to see that.
Do you know what? One of the things that I have missed about lockdown, spending a lot of time working from home, is talking to real people, because the experience of real people, even if not everyone's supporting you, if I walk down the street and people recognise me off the telly or whatever, and they say something, it's mostly nice. Yeah. Even the bits that aren't supportive are mostly pretty respectful and kind of maybe a bit cheeky is the worst that it would get.
Yeah, but in a Glasgow sense of humour, but it's probably not too bad though.
But most people are not in real life the kind of appalling characters that seem to inhabit the online world. So it's reassuring, if you chat to somebody on the bus or at the train station or in the supermarket or whatever, and actually you remember that the real world is not like that.
What do you do to switch off and get away from it? I know that you're a fan of Peacock's ice cream, so that's probably one of your vices. But
there have been some really interesting food businesses that have, little independent places that have managed not just to keep going through this, but even to start up in the middle of this. And Peacock's ice cream is one of the treats. If your listeners haven't heard of it, you can go online and subscribe to their email list, and their flavour drop appears in your email inbox every Sunday night, and it'll usually sell out within 5 or 10 minutes. And at the moment, you have to either collect it or get it delivered. But hopefully, as things get back to something like normality, I suspect there'll be quite a few hospitality venues, cafes, and what have you, who are going to want to stock that stuff, because it's amazing, interesting, weird, eccentric flavours.
Is there anywhere on your doorstep around here that you're looking forward to visit? When things are a bit more better and easier to do so.
I can't wait to have a pint in the Three Judges. It's one of my favourite pubs in Partick. I'm a member of the campaign for Real Ale, so a good pub with a range of interesting beer is something blissful. And the Judges is nice because it's not too loud. It's quite kind of laid back and traditional, and that's the kind of pub I like. I really miss beer festivals. If we can manage to let beer festivals happen again at some point, probably quite a bit later this year before we can do that, but that would be blessed.
Patrick, I'm not putting it down, but if you ever get the invitation, or if anyone ever asks you to go to Motherwell Beer Festival, do not go to it.
Really?
Especially as a member of the campaign for Real Ale. There is no draft beer, there is no Real Ale, it's all bottles. It's the ultimate disappointment. So I'll give you the heads up in that one.
Well, the Paisley one is one of the best.
I've heard that's brilliant.
I mean, it's grown, a wee bit bigger than I find comfortable these days. Troon is fantastic.
Is it? Okay.
The Troon one is lovely. That's smaller,
sure.
But it's really good. And the Glasgow Real Ale Festival, obviously. But yeah, that's an occasional treat if some of the organisers they maybe want somebody to be on a tasting panel to do the judging.
It sounds dangerous.
It is a bit dangerous, yeah. But,
especially if it's tuning, you need to find your way home from
just a very occasional little treat.
Before that, we've got a very important Scottish election coming up in just a matter of weeks, and I suppose the first question for those that are listening or watching is, why should they vote for the Scottish Green Party?
Well, partly I'm obviously going to say I think we've had a good impact. I think when you get Greens elected, it does make a difference. We are the reason why Scotland's got a fairer tax system than the rest of the UK. Back at the last election, we were the only party proposing a serious change to the tax system and showing how it could be done. The SNP wanted basically to tinker at the edges and no real change. Labour and the Lib Dems wanted a penny on the basic rate, so even low earners would be paying more. And obviously the Tories only wanted tax cuts for the wealthiest. We showed that with a 5-band system, you can raise more revenue and protect everybody on a low or average income from any tax rises and close the inequality gap. And that's what we've done. So that's raised hundreds of millions of pounds extra for local services. We've, advanced issues like public transport, energy efficiency, again, saving folk money. During the pandemic, we managed to stop evictions, started during the winter, but that's been extended now. We reversed the unfair downgrading of young people's exam results, well, the replacement for exams, this kind of algorithm that was basically going to entrench educational inequality. We got that fixed. So we've made an impact. But really it's got to be about the future. The decisions that are made in the next session of the Parliament, yes, it'll be about how do we recover from COVID? Do we rebuild the same broken economy that left so many people with low wages and insecure housing and burden people with debt, or do we rebuild a fairer economy? It's also about the climate and nature emergencies, the sense that we can build a society and an economy that meets people's needs without trashing our own life support system. We can do that, but we have to have the will to do it. We have to genuinely be willing to make the transformational changes and not keep telling people you can have more of what you're used to. We need to find ways in politics to actually engage with people about change. Sure. Transport's the obvious example. Most political parties just want to give you, another road, another bridge, give you more of what you're used to, or even make it cheaper to do what you're used to.
Sure.
Cut your fuel taxes or whatever. If we want to genuinely meet people's needs and have a healthier urban environment in a place like Glasgow here, we're on one of the worst air quality
roads,
parts of Scotland, never mind Glasgow, right here on Dumbarton Road. If we want to change that, never mind tackling the carbon emissions, it's not about giving people more of the same. It's about saying we can do this differently. And the poverty and inequality in our society as well is not necessary. It's not a law of nature that the wealthy have to keep hoarding the wealth, and everybody else keeps on creating it but not receiving the benefit. Think of things like automation. I think it's incredible that human beings are so creative, inventive, that we're developing technologies that will do a lot of work that used to be done by people. We need to find ways to make sure that benefits everybody, instead of just benefiting the people who own the intellectual property behind the systems that are being automated. Things like a universal basic income would do that. Would mean that increasing productivity in the economy gets shared by everybody instead of hoarded by a few. You need fair taxation. You need a whole host of different ways of doing that. But ideas like universal basic income would do it in a way that also strengthens the hand of people who are in the workforce when they're negotiating for better wages, because they know they don't have to accept crap wages, because there's a universal basic income that's there to rely on.
I almost feel that UBI is the perfect example of something that should have happened well before the pandemic, and now we're seeing the examples of why that should.
Absolutely. We wouldn't have been debating, do people need £500 as this kind of minimal grant when they have to self-isolate, because you've got that basic. So anyway, these decisions that the next Parliament is going to take are life and death decisions about the climate emergency, about our environmental life support system, but it's also about everything in our economy. So, if you care about your future, you better vote like your future depends on it, because it does. The decisions that are going to be made by MSPs in the next session, whether that's about Scotland's place in the world and the Constitution and independence, whether it's about what independence would be for, what the purpose of it would be. Let's vote for the kind of world that we want to live in.
And we've seen the impact of the things that you touched on there with, 5-6 green MSPs in Parliament. You talk about free bus travel for everyone under 22, reversing the exam results. We're currently polling at getting 11 MSPs, Patrick.
Yeah, one of the most recent polls showed us I think it was Survation, and it's the best poll that I've ever seen for us. It showed us on 11 seats, but it also showed us just a whisker away of getting 2 more. And one of those would be Nadia Kanyangi in Glasgow. That would be getting a 3rd Glasgow seat. That would be phenomenal. You never take anything for granted. And there are polls that are less optimistic for us, but even those seem to be moving in the right direction. So I'm really hopeful. I'm incredibly grateful to all the new volunteers that we've got. We've had so many people signing up to go out and do leaflet deliveries and so on. I wish we could get them knocking on doors and canvassing as well, but to be able to get those deliveries out, to be able to get the scale of a campaign that's visible and that people know that we're out there is fantastic. So massive thank you to everybody who's stepped forward and helped us with that.
You mentioned Nadia Kanyangi there in Glasgow, and I feel that her story's incredible. For those that don't know, Nadia was a refugee, came from Burundi and now lives in Glasgow and is standing on the list for the Scottish Green Party. All across the country, it seems like there's amazing, diverse candidates. That more women candidates than any other political party.
Yeah. That's a biggie for us this time as well, because we've long been committed to gender balance in candidate selection. In fact, I think I'm right in saying the first party conference I ever went to, just a few weeks after I joined, they were debating how to make sure that the gender balance selection process was right. So that's as long as I've been in the party. But the last election, 50-50 just wasn't enough, because we missed out on some seats by a whisker, and we gained region like West of Scotland, Rossgrave in again just over the line, and just with that the way the bricks fell, we ended up with a parliamentary group that was very, very unbalanced, even though we'd had 50-50 candidate selection. So this time we've been clear, 50-50 isn't enough. and our lead candidate list, the people in positions most likely to get elected are about 70% women, and that's if we have even a standstill election, that would result in a 50-50 parliamentary group. But if we have anything like what some of the polls are suggesting, we'll be the first group in the Scottish Parliament with a majority of women in the group. So that's really important to the party, is getting that right.
And I think what's important as well is, it's extremely talented women, and I think the last few weeks have shown, when we've seen, for example, the leaders debate, that Lorna was on her first TV debate there, co-leader with yourself, the talent there's fantastic. And
Lorna and I have been co-leaders together for about a year and a half now, and it's always a little bit of a challenge outside of election time, because the media will go to your parliamentarians because they've got profile already, and that becomes a kind of vicious circle. How do you get more profile when the media want to go to the people who've already got it? Elections are a real opportunity to change that. So Lorna had already done a little bit of live TV interviews and stuff, but that was her first live studio debate, and they were a really challenging thing to do. You really have to be on your toes, and there's a danger of over preparing as well. Of you sound like a robot when you're over prepared. But she was terrific, and she took to it like it's her medium. So I was delighted with the reactions that she was getting and the support that she's had.
Do you enjoy the debates? Like when you're on the telly, before you go on, you must feel slightly nervous, but is there also a bit of excitement about it, or is it like...
I do enjoy them.
Yeah.
And quite often the most frustrating thing is that the time goes so quickly. Yeah. Especially when you get 5, sometimes 6 people on a panel like that. And if they last an hour, that goes very, very quickly. But it's good fun. I'm sad that they're going to be happening without studio audiences at the moment, because that again changes the dynamic, and it gives you a little bit of live feedback about how the arguments are getting across and so on. But it's going to be good fun, and try and get across some of those arguments that Greens are about. And this is the first time the broadcasters have given us equal coverage with the other parliamentary parties as well. So good opportunity.
I think that's very important as well, because that's probably one of the main differences between this election and 2016 election, is that I think that for people that are looking in, Scottish Greens are much more visible now. This is a serious party that's going to make a difference.
Yeah, and we've been doing our best to give the media a little bit of kind of daily dose of what we've got to say each morning. We were talking today about the need for a proper ban on fox hunting. And so I got to go and visit a wildlife centre where they've got a fox called MacDonald, who's been there since he was discovered a few days old as a cub. So he's very, very tame and friendly. Sure. He's never lived in the wild. Still a wild animal, but tame enough that you can have a bit of a play with him. And so at one point,
the photos
climbing on top of my head. And, yeah. So that was a bit of a highlight. Yeah.
I love that you brought that up as well, because I've seen I'll touch on some of the negative comments that I've seen from opposition parties, and I think you could probably laugh these off. It's on one side you've got people saying Scottish Greens don't care about independence, they're not remotely interested, and then on the other side you've got people that are saying, they don't care about environmental issues, all they care about is independence.
I mean, like we were saying, Twitter brings out the worst sometimes, but if there's a certain kind of particularly hard right unionist who'll parrot everything the Tories come out with, and if we're saying something that's not about the environment, if we're saying something about poverty or social policy or nuclear weapons or the Constitution, it's these fake Greens, they never talk about the environment. As soon as you start talking about climate change, they're talking about climate once in a while. What a shock! Nicola must have let them.
If you come out in Nicola's pocket,
it's just drivel. It's just drivel. Oh, and the bad memes they come out. Oh my God! Somebody needs to give these people a bit of training on Photoshop or something. Because they're awful. But on the other side, on the pro-independence side as well, you've got some people who just are so obsessed with one issue that they can't see beyond it. And if we're not saying independence, if we're talking about anything other than that, it's like, oh, you don't really care about Indy, do you? You don't really care about Indy. And can we not just rise above this a little bit? Don't we think our country, if you believe that Scotland can and should be an independent country, don't you think it deserves a political debate that's a bit richer than that?
Yeah.
That actually engages with the things that affect people's lives on a daily basis,
Yeah.
that cost people's lives on a daily basis? Poverty and inequality in this society is the responsibility of local government, it's the responsibility of the Scottish government, it's the responsibility of the UK government, and yeah, I profoundly disagree with many things that the UK government have done, not just the Tory government, but the Labour government before them, that effectively turned what should be a social security system into a system for bullying people into low-paid work, and then subsidising that low-paid work so that employers don't need to take responsibility. So I profoundly disagree with a lot of what the UK government has done, but that doesn't mean that we stop taking responsibility. It doesn't mean that you say, wheesht for Indy, everything will be sorted after. It won't. The problems that our society has will not be solved with independence unless the pro-independence movement is fully committed to acting with the powers that we have now. We need to demonstrate by our actions what we're about and what the purpose of it is. So I feel equally frustrated by some of the people who pretend that independence is just a silver bullet, that it solves every problem, that it's the one thing we need.
It's only the start, isn't it?
As I am by the people who say, shut up about independence, it would be a disaster, it would never work, the UK is wonderful and perfect. Both of these extreme positions are a nonsense. I hope, and I actually believe, that Scotland will be independent in the not too distant future and will take its place on the world stage. And the kind of country that I want that to be is one that will advocate for transformational change, both at home and on the world stage. And if it's not doing that, at that point I would question what the purpose of it was. But I'm convinced that we can do it, and do it in a way that does open up a world of possibilities for a better society.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on it there. Green MSPs are going to be very crucial and very important when it comes to securing that independence vote, if and when it comes.
Well, that's been the case in the current session, certainly, and even a lot of the polls that are suggesting the SNP would get a majority on their own are saying that they would only just be over that margin. So I think there's a very, very strong chance that they will need a good, strong group of Green MSPs in there, not just saying, yes, we're committed to a referendum, yes, it should happen in this session, yes, it's for the Scottish Parliament to decide the timing and the question, and that we'll campaign for a yes vote, but actually saying, and that shouldn't stop us from taking responsibility now for taking more profound action. Things like our education system, which is still based on this kind of almost a 19th century model of a kind of high stakes, the kind of exam pressure. We're not taking the lessons from the more progressive Scandinavian countries, for example, that are actually being successful in closing the attainment gap.
And one of the Scottish Green policies, Patrick, is let's start school at 7 and have a kindergarten age before that.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. We're still teaching people to be, effective participants in the 20th century economy. At best, we really need to go back to first principles with issues like education, health. We're still at the point where everybody values the health service, and we want to keep the health service properly funded, keep it in the public sector and all this, and yet we're building a society that creates ill health. We're not, we're building systems to fish people out of the river while we're still pushing people into the river further upstream. Why can't we think about our planning system, our transport system, in terms of the health impact that we have? Why can't we think about our housing in terms of its impact on people's health and well-being? Because fundamentally, if we don't do that, we're still going to be storing up problems. And even if we are independent, if we're not taking that different approach to these issues we're already responsible for, there'll still be problems.
Going to be a very interesting election night this time, because obviously usually it goes through the night where you wake up the next morning, you usually know who's been elected, but
my first time we counted overnight and we got the result at 5:30 in the morning, and then a bunch of us crossed the footbridge from the SEC to my flat in Finniston, and there were more of us than I had square feet of floor space, and we celebrated and had a drink and what have you, and then I got straight on the train to go to the press conference in the morning. It's not going to be like that. We're going to have to wait 2, maybe 3 days for the final result. And will the candidates be able to go home and go to sleep? I don't know.
It's early, isn't it? It's certainly different. Yeah.
Some people won't miss the overnight count. Some people don't like it. I like it. It's a good place for gossip as well when you go to the count.
I can imagine.
You're no longer in that kind of ultra competitive mode that you are in the final stages of an election, and so folk across the different parties, some folk in political parties are so tribally hostile that it's not worth bothering. But most political parties have got a fair number of folk who are friendly enough that you can have a bit of banter and a bit of gossip and stuff. Election counts are good for that.
That's a really interesting point, because we see everyone in this polarised society, especially when it comes to politics, but there must be some people across the divide that you do get on with on a personal level.
Absolutely. And I think that's again something that suffered in the absence of working physically together in the Parliament building so much. Working from home is all very well, and it's good that we can. And I hope the Scottish Parliament will continue, especially for kind of family-friendly reasons, to allow people to work from home and vote from home. Perhaps within limits. Maybe not everybody all the time. But not being able to have folk together in the Parliament, and maybe prop up the bar together at the end of an evening or whatever. It's some of the informal discussions that happen. That's one of the things that keeps politics civilised. And I wonder if it's one of the reasons things have got so polarised in the last few months.
Because you're not together.
So tribally hostile. Yeah, it's just because people aren't having that kind of human interaction. So I'm looking forward to getting back to that when we can. And I think probably lots of people in lots of different jobs will recognise that as well. That working from home has got its advantages, but there's a human contact that's missed as well.
Absolutely. Patrick, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks to everyone who has watched or listened to this episode of the DW podcast. If you've not done so, please like and subscribe. You can follow Patrick and the Scottish Greens on all social media platforms. You can also vote for them on the 6th of May. Thanks very much.